Welcome to Moonbeaming, a podcast about creativity, magic, tarot, lunar living, and more. I'm your host, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, and I am so happy you are here today. Hello, babes. Hello, magic makers. Hello, artists. Hello, cuties. Hello, angels. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit about what's happening with the moon. We've got a new moon. I believe it's on February 11th. How you celebrate it, when you celebrate it is completely up to you. And I have been thinking so much about the topic of identity, probably because I'm in a transformation situation with my identity, and also because I really want to just touch upon for a minute how themes of the year can pop up for folks. Last year was an emperor year. I have a couple of episodes about that. And one of the themes of the emperor is about identity. Like, who are we? Who do we want to be? How do we translate that with our actions, with our words, with our values, with how we show up in our lives, how we allow ourselves to show up, right? So a lot of folks are coming to me in my tarot practice as clients, and they're really in this identity transformation. They're really grappling with and transforming aspects of self that were maybe coping mechanisms, aspects of self that are ready to come out now and be expressed, maybe that were dormant that are now being ready to be birthed or attended to. And so there's a lot of identity stuff happening in the air and identity transformation. And so if you're listening and that's you, you are not alone. There are a lot of folks making changes about who they are and how they show up. And consequently, I created a tarot spread about that for my newsletter babes. So if you're on the list and you want to do some more work, some more questioning, some more excavation, then there is a tarot spread for you. Also, I remember a quote from one of my earlier Emperor episodes, and forgive me, I'm not quite sure which one it is, but I think it might be the episode about the Emperor that I recorded in 2020. But there's this idea of like, you can decide who you are. You can decide who you want to be, even though you might not have evidence of that. Your desire, your idea is the evidence that you can then take steps around to illuminate, to express, and so on and so forth. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, number one, again, it just seems to be in the air. I've been seeing a lot of clients, and this has been coming up. And also a theme that came forward for the month of February lining up. So let's take a couple steps back. I had a message about February, number one, being this weird month. Like, it's going to feel weird. Take that as it were. I'm a weirdo, so personally, I love weird feeling things. And also sometimes it feels uncomfortable, hard to place, hard to process, so on and so forth. So there's that. And why it kind of feels weird is because we are integrating. We are integrating lessons from the last year. We're integrating the past with the future. We're integrating certain things we've learned, whether they be skill sets or downloads that we've received or conversations or aha moments we've had. We're integrating those with our actions, with the decisions we're making, with the choices we're making. And one thing I want to say about integration is like people in like so-called New Age landia and like Psychologyville love to use the word integration. So here I am, guilty as charged, using that word. And also the process of integration so often feels messy, so often feels hard to like see if we're making progress. We might have one great day, or like we might be able to make one great choice, and then the next day it's 2 steps back. I don't really believe in like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but y'all are picking up what I'm throwing down. Integration is this process that takes place over a long period of time, and it's a practice like every single thing is. And I'm bringing this up because the card of the week is justice. And you're like, okay, great. Justice can be about integration through balance. And again, like I want to parse some ideas out here. Balance is sometimes about choosing that middle way. So often when we're trying a new thing, like let's just use boundaries as an example. We're trying to instate boundaries. We tend to sometimes go towards the other extreme. Like if, say, we've had difficulty with boundaries in our family, we might tend to go to a real extreme where we're like, no, this isn't okay, or I'm creating this boundary, I don't want to talk about this now, or I don't feel comfortable discussing this, or I'm not available for that, and so on and so forth. We'll really like swaying into an extreme as we're sort of parsing out how we want to explore our boundary. We can use that for like any other thing we're working on. Then we calibrate, we explore, we experiment, we take a step back, we gain a different perspective. And there's this blending that happens, and this blending that often happens with justice, this bridge between what we think something should be and how we actually need to be showing up for it or showing up for ourselves in our lives. So justice for this week, thinking about balance, thinking about harmonizing, thinking about not going to one extreme, I think will be really valuable. There's 2 other things I want to say about February, about this card, about integration and identity. In the witching world, or in spaces where folks talk about self-development or transformation, there's a lot of like, for lack of a better explanation, I sometimes see it mimicking capitalism, where like we're supposed to hustle into the new version of ourselves. Like we're supposed to like full force go for it. And again, I'm here for that. Like if that's where you're at in your life, blessed mother loving be to you. I said good day to you. Good day and blessed mother loving be. And also, if you're someone who has trauma in your past that you're healing from, if you're someone who has nervous system stuff and like residues of trauma stuff, in my experience, again, I'm not a therapist, but I see a lot of clients who are healing with trauma, who are living with trauma. That is definitely me. I think that is a lot of people. That sort of hustle, that sort of like push forward can be really dysregulating and can be not necessarily helpful. So the analogy I'm using, and that I often use for those of y'all who are living with PTSD or CPTSD or have a dysregulated nervous system, who find themselves in these states of fight, freeze, or fawn, the analogy I use with all of it is, instead of jumping in cannonball style into an ocean, we're wading in. It might take a little bit more time. It might be a little bit more gradual, But we've got to get the nervous system on board. We've got to get that inner child on board. We've got to get all aspects of self on board in a way that feels safe in order to move forward in a sustainable, effective way. So when we're doing all of this identity work and we're doing all of this transformation, which so many of us are doing, really thinking about justice as our guiding card, as our helper card, as a teacher card to that blend, to avoid that extreme, to not go too far in one direction, to go gradually in ways that feel affirming and in ways that feel safe for us. I really wanted to say that. And I could not let Justice card for card of the week in this month go without mentioning that it's Mercury retrograde, which is super cool. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm not going to get into it. I'm not an astrologer. And also, I'm someone who experiences planetary energy just like every single one of you. I'm absolutely someone who has their own experiences that don't always line up with so-called like popular Western tropical astrology with certain things. This is such a great time for going within. This is such a great time for gaining clarity through discernment, through your intuition. And with justice being here, we're thinking about contracts. We're thinking about contracts that we made a long time ago that maybe kept us safe or maybe kept us part of certain family systems or communities. We're thinking about, before we make decisions, getting all the information, asking all the questions, taking the time that we need to have all of the pieces in place so that we can make informed decisions. That's definitely something that goes along with the justice card. So if you're signing stuff, just double check everything. If you need to call in a consultant, if you need to call in a friend, if you need to call in someone to help you look over certain things, please do that. And if it's time to burn old cosmic contracts of how you show up, of how you accommodate other people, of how you let certain things slide, this is such a great time and such a great week to address those consciously with compassion in order to clear up your energy. So that's my little intro, and I hope some of it resonates. And meditate on the justice card this week. Meditate on what this new moon energy is bringing forth in you, and enjoy. Okay, my loves, I am so excited for this episode. I got to interview the wonderful, the talented, the gifted, the amazing, heart-centered, heart-led writer, activist, teacher, thought leader, Rachel Ricketts. I've known Rachel for quite a while. I am constantly impressed with her honesty, with her heart, for lack of a better word, with her clear thought. She's really here with a strong message around equity, around social justice, spirituality, and the intersection between these really important topics, ways of being. So we got into a lot of really great stuff. We talked a lot about the book that Rachel just released. It's called Do Better. I highly recommend it. I highly suggest you pick that up. It's really, really, really a beautiful, beautiful work. It's spiritual, it's deep, it's practical, it's honest, It's filled with insight. It's filled with suggestions on how to move forward in creating a safer, more equitable space for Black lives. So our conversation was really beautiful, really needed. I know you're going to enjoy it. If you are not familiar with Rachel, you are going to love Rachel, and you're going to want to pick up a copy of her book, Do Better. So without further ado, enjoy. Today on the podcast, I have the one and only genius, writer, teacher, healer, shining star, Rachel Ricketts. Rachel, hello.
Hello. So honored and grateful to be here in conversation with you.
I'm so excited. I was hoping that you could introduce yourself, share a little bit about who you are, what you do for our listeners.
Cool. My name's Rachel Ricketts. I am a queer, multiracial Black woman, a racial justice educator, spiritual activist, disruptor, healer, truth teller, and I am most known for supporting folks with the deeply critical work of unpacking, dismantling, and healing from white supremacy. So specifically supporting white folks in addressing their inherent racism, and Black, Indigenous, and people of color in unpacking, acknowledging, and addressing our internalized oppression, and supporting all of us in contributing and really taking on the task of ending oppression in all forms across time and space. So just that.
No big deal. Just little small things. So I wanted to know, does your work now, does it feel like a calling?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the reason I'm here on this planet. I actually I was thinking about this the other day, like, especially in the midst of this year, this season with all this uncertainty, it's fucking hard no matter what, but it'd be really hard if you really didn't feel like you knew what your purpose was or why you were here. This is why I am here.
And I'm wondering, did it all just come together? Did you know this for a long time? Was it a slower process? Did you have to go through different iterations? Like when was sort of the time period where this all coalesced into what you do, who you are, what you feel like you're here for?
It was a shit show in a word. I've had so many occupations, so many careers: publicist, attorney, waitress, spin instructor, you name it, really. And always had a deep value and need for justice, which is what led me into the law. And then very promptly realizing that law has nothing to do with justice, which was really, really hard and heartbreaking. And have always been a deeply spiritual person, partially imparted within me by both of my parents, more so my mother, but and have always kind of wondered how all of these different, desires, values, and trainings would coalesce into something. And after my mother died in 2015, I had been her primary caregiver since I was 13, so almost 20 years. And after she passed, I had all of this space and grief to really sit with and process. And so I first really dove into grief work because we don't talk about grief enough. All of us are ill-equipped to deal with grief. I think we've really seen that come to light in 2020. So I really dove into that work, and then very, very quickly realized that the most grief I've ever experienced as a result of being a Black woman. And once I realized I was queer, a queer Black woman. And so the work I do, racial justice work, supporting folks through ending all forms of oppression, which for me, when I say racial justice, I mean ending all forms of oppression, is grief work. It's trauma work. It's healing work. So all these, spiritual modalities that I'm interested in, that I'm trained in, really lend themselves to the healing work, to addressing our trauma, to addressing our grief, which is, for me, imperative for racial justice. But if you had like a graph of how I got here, it would be like a stock market. It'd be like all over the fucking place. Didn't make a lot of sense. And really is a result of me doing my healing work. If I hadn't unpacked all of the shit I needed to unpack, I wouldn't have got here. I would still be like at a desk pushing paper as a corporate lawyer, making rich, cis, white, able-bodied men money, which felt atrocious, and wasn't my calling.
Don't know that it's too many people's calling. Really, but who knows? It's some people's callings. Yeah, I mean, I think that I love that you are being honest about this, because I think for so many people, I think one of the biggest human existential questions is this feeling of like, why am I here? And I think sometimes we make it harder than it has to be. And I think sometimes we have to sort of go through a bunch of iterations to understand what we don't want.
Yeah.
And then we get closer to feeling like what we do. And I think that a big theme that has come up in the last few years and is only going to continue is this call for people to step into a more authentic blending or integration between who they are as a person, what's in their heart and what they're doing in the world. Not saying that their job has to be that, but just there's more awareness and attention on how like we compartmentalize ourselves. And I think that showing up whole and embodied is going to be a theme of like the next few years across the board. So I love that you're sharing with our listeners that it's not easy. It's not like easy, there's a lot of moments of like WTF. And then there are the moments where you step into trust or you figure out more of what you're good at. And I wanted to sort of talk about that with you because your work is at this intersection of so many things. You're a writer, you're a truth teller, you're a spiritual guide, you do anti-racist education. I know you do consulting, you do a ton of other things, I'm sure. I don't even know. You're running this huge GoFundMe to support Black, Brown, Indigenous women, I believe, of color, correct?
Black, Indigenous women, yes.
Thank you. What qualities have you had to cultivate in yourself in order to do this kind of work in the world?
It's very, very, integrity is one of my highest core values. So for me to call in anyone else and not be calling in myself constantly is bullshit. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out in these streets who are doing that. And I talk about the wealth and hellness industry a lot. And that's something that we see quite frequently, and it causes a lot of harm. It's violent, straight up. So I'm not here to perpetuate that. So it's very imperative for me that I am holding myself accountable, and I have people in my life who are constantly holding me accountable as well. It sounds simple, but it's the hardest work we'll ever do, which is why so many of us don't want to do it. But if I had not committed to my own internal work, to my own healing, then I just simply couldn't be where I am, and I couldn't do the work that I do, because the work that I do is space holding, and I can't fucking hold space for a damn thing if I'm not holding space for myself. And I can easily say that and say to you, great, well, then you must be really great at holding space for yourself because you hold space for some people. And the answer is no, I am absolutely not. And I am really, it's an ongoing journey and battle and healing, right? It's not linear and it's forever. Another reason why someone heal don't want to really invest in it. It doesn't end. And the more you heal this one thing, it's always like an onion for me. I'm really visual. You just peel back the outer layers and it just gets like more tear inducing closer to the center. You're like, oh, there's this thing, but then there's this whole other thing. And the work for me also is incredibly spiritual in that that the work I'm doing is for me, but it's also for my family and my ancestry, right? And as a queer, multiracial Black woman, like that, there's so much packed into that. So it really requires me. Rest has just come up so much this year. I mean, I think for all of us, and we really have a deeper understanding of the ways in which we don't understand how to rest. We don't even understand someone told me this, you don't understand what rest is. You don't understand what it is. You don't understand how to do it. And you don't understand actually what it is. So like you need to ask you need to ask your Taurus friends how they rest because they know what rest is. I was like, okay, I'm a Virgo. I was like, okay. And not in a negative way, but I was like, I took that. Like, yeah, I think that's really true. Like rest for me is just working like a little bit, but what does actual true rest mean? And what's come up for me a lot in this year, the year of 2020 vision is this season, right? Because it's not about Gregorian calendars. This season of 2020 vision is how hard it is to rest, especially as someone who has been ostracized, othered, and oppressed by systems of oppression. So I'm not meant to rest. Rest really feels like death in my body, and literally meant death for my ancestors. So again, it's something I preach all the time. It's something that to me is critical and imperative to be able to do the work. There will be no revolution without rest. There will be no proper organized resistance unless we're rested. We can't actually get where we need to be and envision a world outside of these bullshit systems if we haven't rested. And so I need to rest in order to practice what I preach and in order to be able to really continue to hold the space and move the dial in the way that it needs to be moved. And I've learned that the hard way. I've learned that from being like completely burnt out, for like the past 10 years.
Yes, I think there's going to be so many people who can relate to what you're saying. And I'm curious if in the past, say, 6 months or so, there's been like, do you just schedule it? What does it feel like to really because so I'll just share from my awakening around me not resting was like, one, the rest is what I get to do after I do the thing, which feels like so if then or so conditional. And second, what I think of as rest isn't. I'm like watching a show on Netflix while my phone is in my hand, or I'm texting someone, but I'm like still thinking, or my nervous system is still engaged in some way. So I had to really be like, wait a minute, like what are the activities? And also just like staring at a wall, like, and also just literally straight up doing nothing for whatever. So how did what has been your kind of practice around that?
Trial and error, for sure. The COVID-19 pandemic obviously is a traumatic and traumatizing and harrowing and devastating in so many ways, and was a doorway into so much opportunity. So in the moment when we were locked down for the first time, I really wanted to utilize that. I really saw that as an opportunity of like, when again in our lifetime will capitalism be drawn to a halt in this way? Hopefully again, for sure. But like, we've never seen it, and I'm not going to like hold my breath. So Rachel, like, take this opportunity. I will also say I was writing a fucking book. So hard. Yeah, I roll. Hard to navigate these two things, but I really wanted to put at the forefront of like, this is an opportunity. To me, this was Mama Gaia. This was universe being like, listen, y'all, you're not getting where you need to be fast enough, because you have a ticking time bomb. Because we can talk about COVID-19 and we can talk about racial justice and all those things till the cows come home, but climate crisis is the ticking time. Like, we literally are running out of time. And all of these things are intertwined, but we are running out of time to be able to continue to live on the planet at all. So I really wanted to prioritize this opportunity to try and lean into it. And so I did. I was like, okay, really, what does it mean to like just sit and be like you said? And I will say again, that's where I really got hip to how deep the trauma goes, especially as a queer Black woman who has been conditioned from before birth to always be doing. And that rest really means death. It's like that it's not. And then the guilt and shame that comes with rest, because, I'm also witnessing how many people who look like me who don't have the capacity to rest. Like, that's not the capacity. Everyone has capacity and have the privilege of rest, because rest is a right, but in our systems as we live within them, it's a privilege. So like all of this fucking shit that comes up, just really trying to like process that. And then even when my nervous system, which is rare, but even when my nervous system could like really be with it, I still felt this deep whispering of my ancestors, like freaking out, like their nervous systems were not okay with it, right? And so I'm doing this work for me, but I also have to be like, y'all, we are okay. This is why I'm here. I'm here to support myself in learning this, and in doing so to also support you all. But that is such a task to undertake, like that. It's not just my own trauma and my own shit. It's like all of theirs. And so that has been incredibly challenging. Palpable things that I have done include, I had the privilege of being able to relocate. So I was right in the thick of being in a downtown central city for the peak of the lockdown. I was subletting a place. I wasn't anywhere permanent. And so my partner and I were like, let's relocate, because we know this is just going to get worse in the winter. And it's something that we can do. So we drove across the country, and we are now in a space that we're in a tiny ass town, and we're surrounded by nature. And so for me, I know that that's really grounded for both of us. It's really grounding for both of us. So again, there's this like pinch for me, because in wealth and hellness spaces, it's like, well, just like manifest what you need and like be in nature for yourself. And like, yeah, sure. But that's a privilege and so many people don't have access to that. But I do have access to it. And so I was able to create that for myself. And that is huge. I am that person who just sits and stares outside. I sit and stare at the trees. I stare at the birds. There's like eagles. I've gotten into birding. I'm like Googling what eagles' feathers look like at certain ages. I'm like, I have binoculars. I'm like that person. And that to me, I mean, nature is like just the ultimate humbler, right? Just like really being grounded and realizing like we're so small and we're really at the mercy of her. So to see stars, like I can see so many stars. I saw Mars so beautifully, right? Like a month or however many, a little bit ago, just to be reminded of the universe that we live in and like really our place in it has been incredibly grounding. So that, and when that wasn't palpably available to me, I did my best to put my nervous system in that state. So I would like meditate and envision myself in nature when I couldn't actually access it, which is something I like to offer to folks a lot because a lot of us don't have access to it. And then the other thing I do is really try to limit my technology time. So this past weekend, I turned my phone off the whole weekend, like messaged my really close people, don't worry about me. My phone's off. You won't hear from me till like Sunday night, Monday morning. And I just left it in my room. And that is like the most freeing fucking shit. And for those of us who are like our age-ish, like we remember days when you would just go out and like no one can get a hold of you. It's amazing. And I'm like, can we go back to those days? Because energetically, the pull is constant. Just having your phone, even if you're not checking your email, just knowing that people are fucking asking you for shit. And then there's DMs in your Instagram and like some other fucking notification, like it just is too much. Our systems shouldn't have to endure that, really. And it keeps us unrested and stuck, and it's all intentional. This is the system working as designed. So to literally turn my phone off and just put it away, and again, a privilege. I live with someone, so I don't need to like, I can get connection without having to have my phone and like other things. You also really realize how much we depend on our phones for like everything. But just trying that out, even if it's for a few hours, like I'm just going to actually turn my phone off because our willpower is minimal because these systems have ensured that like we get dopamine hits when we go to check it. So we're just checking it all the time. Like I'm 36. I think I'm someone who knows myself. I think I'm pretty self-aware. I am the first one to like go down an Instagram hole for hours. So
you are speaking to myself and I'm sure many other people. I think about this all the time. I usually will not take my phone when I walk my dogs. And I have this weird feeling of like, but what if someone needs to get a hold with me? Or what if something happens and one of the dogs escapes and then I can't call my whatever, like, and I'm like, wow, that is a little bit too attached. We're going on a 20-minute walk. So that
right.
I totally understand it. So I want to talk about this now, because you brought it up a bunch of times. I love it. You talk about it in your book Do Better. You talk about the health and wellness industry. You call it the wealth and hellness industry. So I would imagine that it feels uncomfortable or interesting or hard to operate in this space. I mean, I personally find so much of it repulsive. I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance there. I'm wondering, like, what does it feel like to be in a disruptor in this space, especially because, like, you share in your book that, and you shared before in the interview, you've been a spin instructor. I think you've been a meditation guide. I think you've done yoga. I don't know to what capacity. You've been in that space, and now you're sort of in this space as an educator. And so you've been on all these different sides of it. I call it the spiritual industrial complex as well. So
I love that.
I'd love to hear your experience like with it now, like if you see it changing, like what does it feel like, you've seen all of the sides and in different ways,
I think we have the most opportunity for it to change because there's enough of us who are speaking up against it, mostly Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer folks, disabled folks, like anyone who's been made marginalized because it doesn't work for any of us because it was never made for any of us, right? So, which is like we're the global majority. I think there's a huge opportunity, and I would say that generally about just the collective and where we're at right now, there's a huge opportunity. It will really be up to the people who have the most power and privilege, who are the gatekeepers, as to whether they are going to do the work that's required in order for it to actually change. But I will say, irrespective of whether they do or not, what's phenomenal, I have a lot of issues with technology, obviously. I could go on about it all day, but what's phenomenal about what we've been able to cultivate as a community through time and space, virtually or otherwise, is the ability to create these spaces for ourselves and to commune with one another, right? So I grew up in a really white, wealthy space. I was the only Black person, like, anywhere ever. And there weren't opportunities for me to be in space with other Black people, really not even other Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And now there is. Like, I was taking dance classes with Debbie Allen Dance Academy at the peak of COVID crisis. And my inner child, I was taking like African dance online. And I am a single child, an only child of a single mom who's chronically ill and disabled. We didn't have money, and I always wanted to dance, and I would just dance around my room, and it was never an option for me to, like, I think I was able to take one actual dance class that she could afford, and like that was it. So to have that, like, my inner child was just like overjoyed at this opportunity of being able to like hold space, be taught by a Black person, my ancestors' movements, like, what a fucking gift. And to be able to tap into my own medicine, and medicine created by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, by queer folks, is a huge game changer. The fact that we have cultivated these spaces for ourselves, to be leaders for ourselves, So it's kind of like the music industry. It's like a Napster situation where it's like, you all are doing this thing over here, and whether you're going to include us in quotations or call us in or like whatever, like, which would require you doing your own work, right? Because you can't just bring us into violent spaces and then that's okay. You have to do your work so that the spaces aren't violent, which would require, by the way, like a complete overhaul of the industry, because it's all appropriative and violent and non-inclusive. So whether that happens or not, like, we will continue to cultivate these spaces for ourselves. And the more we have those spaces and can tap into our practices, like, the more potent and powerful we get. So we don't need y'all and whatever the fuck it is you're doing.
I love that take because, I think it's just, I'm a white person, and also I've had experiences with like heteronormativity and just like not just the ickiness of many, many aspects of many things. But anyway, I that's sort of where I've come to in my own life, is like divestment. It's like, I don't want to work with so and so. You don't want to pay me. You want me to do 5 hours of work for you for exposure. I don't want to be a girl boss. Like, I'm not interested in like, but you know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, I want to focus on building relationships with people that I respect and admire. And like, from my point of view, just again, I'm a super privileged cis white lady. Listen, running a business is one of the hardest things I think someone can do. And I would imagine that running a business as a Black queer person or a Black trans person, like, it's just probably beyond difficult. And also, I think that there is this move towards building our own ecosystems of care and compassion.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
You do end up finding folks, you do end up finding like-minded folks, you do end up finding ways that are healthier outside of, these structures and these systems. So I'm really glad you brought that up. So I wanted to talk a bit about the work like that you do in your trainings or like in your workshops. I see some similarities, and I'm only speaking for myself, between spiritual awakenings and like waking up to white supremacy. And I don't want to conflate the two. I don't want people to think that I'm saying that if I'm going to be anti-racist as a white person, that counts as like self-development or something like that, like to center myself. And also, I think for me personally in my own work, doing all of the unpacking, doing anti-racist inner work and outer work is learning how to be a decent human being.
Yeah.
Like, it's learning how to just be a person who has compassion and who is grounded and who, respects the sacredness of all other life,
Yes.
regardless of who they are, what they are, where they live, whatever. So there's that. But so I'm wondering for you, like, are there any parallels? Because also in my own work with unpacking my own white supremacy, there's had to be a lot of ego death. Like, and that's really painful. Yeah. And I think that there's that parallel between that and spiritual work. So I'm wondering if in your own work or in your clients, are there some, like, what's the intersection between spiritual work and anti-racist work?
So for me, they're really one and the same. I don't believe that you can be a spiritual person if you aren't tapped into the interconnectedness between all living beings, not just humans, but all living beings. And if you aren't tapped into the interconnectedness of all living beings, you're not going to have an understanding of the ways in which my oppression is your oppression, or you oppressing me is causing me harm and you, right? Both, like, so, and you're not just self-interested. You're in a collective minded, community minded state of being. To me, that is part and parcel of spirituality. It's not the spirituality that we are taught a lot, whether it's secular or non-secular, but to me, that's what is required. And therefore, you're also active, because to have that understanding of the ways in which we are all interconnected, and to have an understanding of the ways in which the systems of oppression are causing harm for us as a community, a global collective community, you need to do something about that. You can't just like sit and meditate in the hopes that that will address something. It can create space for you to do what you need to do, but it's not doing anything to address the problem directly. And then for me, and I talk about this a lot in the book, anti-racism is trauma work. Like I said, it's grief work, it's trauma work, and it absolutely is ego death. I talk about this a lot. It's addressing your shadow self and your wounded inner child. And I can say firsthand, it's the hardest fucking work you'll ever fucking do. So call in all the support you possibly can. And for me, that's where spirituality comes in. It's not appropriative. It's honoring. And it supports us in supporting the work of addressing our trauma, facing our shadow, tending to our ego, having the capacity to withstand the full spectrum of our human emotions. And so many of us can't, because white supremacist capitalism ensures that we can't, tells us not to, really, like, to not trust our own hearts and guts. So we're ill-equipped. And that's where I think spirituality can really be of support. And by spirituality, I mean spirituality and spiritual modalities, right? Most of which were created by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, because we have been made marginalized for centuries, and like part and parcel of how we have survived is having these modalities that allowed us to get into our bodies and process and heal. So breath work for me is huge, because it really allows us to get into our body. Meditation is really, really important. Energy healing, yoga, and I don't mean physical asana, I mean the 8 limbs of yoga, which actually, when you dive into it, is spiritual activism. It's caring for ourselves, finding stillness in being, so that we can support our collective advancement and enlightenment. So all of these things, I think, are really vital and absolutely interconnected. Absolutely interconnected. Can you be anti-racist and not be a spiritual person? Yeah, for sure. For sure. I just think it's going to be a hell of a lot harder. I just wouldn't want that for you.
I love that. So in your book, you talk a lot about challenges you've seen in white women, blocks, ways that white women perpetuate violence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious. It can just be right now how you're feeling, because again, like, similar to you operating in the wealth and hellness space, you also do this thing that takes, as far as I'm concerned, like, so much resilience and compassion, which is you teach thousands of white women.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, correct.
Like, you interface with thousands, not 1, not 5, thousands. Like, what do you see as being, is it the ability to not be comfortable? Like, what do you see as this sort of breakthrough or this block that many white women, we're not speaking about every single one, but because you have literally interfaced with thousands, what do you think we as white women really, really need to examine, or what is the biggest block?
2 main things. The first primary one is being oppressed oppressors. So that's just something that white women have a really, really tough time with. Black men also have a really tough time with this, because y'all are really stuck in the oppression that you endure. So as white women, you're stuck in the oppression you endure because of patriarchy and queer white women heteropatriarchy. And really get fixated on that. Like, but my life has been hard. I have endured violence and harm. And so for some reason, you feel that that negates the harm that you cause others, or you're unwilling to look at the ways in which you cause harm because you are so focused in, which is selfishness, to be honest, focused in on the harm that you have experienced. And so, again, I talk about this at length in the book, but being able to withstand your position as I really believe we're all oppressed oppressors. It's like, it would really be a rare person who doesn't have some form of privilege that does cause other people harm. They exist, but it's rare. So I'm thin, light-skinned, cis. I'm in a hetero passing relationship. I'm in Canada. Like, I'm highly educated. I'm financially secure. I have a lot of privileges, and I oppress others as a result of the position of power that I hold because of the status quo in a lot of ways. So what white women have a really hard time with is acknowledging and owning that. And then secondarily, because they're tied, is being good and right. So if you are committed to being good and right, you're not committed to justice. And if you're being committed to good and right, you can't acknowledge or be with your role as an oppressed oppressor, because then you have to acknowledge that you've caused harm, and then you're not good and you're not right. So all of these things are intertwined, and that's really where I see we all struggle with this. Everyone, no matter who you are, with all of these things, most of us. But white women really have, I find, the toughest time and get stuck in it the most, and then are unable to move past. So what I also see in white women a lot because of these roadblocks is what some people call white fragility, and I call white wildness, because there's nothing fragile about it. It's violent. This total inability to really, like, for me, see the world as it is and, like, you know, interface with reality, because it will cause you harm, and you don't have a tolerance for your own emotions. And a lot of that is rage. You don't have a tolerance for your rage because it hasn't been allowed, right? And that is the way in which heteropatriarchy has harmed all of us. Women are not allowed to be angry, especially not women of color, very especially not Black women. But white women are the quote unquote model of femininity. Femininity is quiet, it's demure, it's meek, it's thin, right? It's white, it's all of these things. And so to live up to that expectation, you bypass your anger in many ways, although you are happy to unleash it on people that you feel you can, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color, which is the ways in which you operate as oppressed oppressors. So those are where Karens come from. It's like you have a lot of emotions and trauma that you need to fucking process, and you're not doing that work. And so you're unleashing it on, like, an 8-year-old Black child who is trying to sell bottles of water. And your commitment to being good and right is preventing you from being able to see your role as oppressed oppressor and the ways you cause harm. And really then it's just getting away of you being able to do any of the justice work and also your own healing work. Because hello, if you are committed to healing, you're wrong all the time. You fuck it up. And I just want to also caveat all of this. It's imperative to me, and I do talk about this in the book, that we also have compassion for all of this, because systems were put in place so that all of us are ill-equipped to navigate this and have an understanding. And so what I am asking people to do is rewrite everything you've ever known. I talk about this a lot. So white folks have to unplug, everyone has to unplug from the matrix, and take a real look. Take your rose-colored glasses off if you've had power and privilege, and really take a look at what is going on, the ways that you've caused harm and perpetuated systems of oppression that also oppress you, not in the same way, but they oppress everybody. But if we don't have compassion for ourselves as we move through this process, again, which is where we pull in these, like, culturally informed, culturally appreciative forms of spirituality, we won't get anywhere, because then you just get stuck in shame and guilt and grief. And that is also not helping the movement. You being stuck in that doesn't help anything. I don't want that for you. And also, like, then you're just obsessed with yourself, which is also where white women get stuck. The crying and the I'm a bad person, right? And it's like, yeah, you're not as good as you thought you were. Becky, I'm sorry. You are not as good as you thought you were, and you're fucking wrong a lot, and you've caused a lot of harm. What do you need to do to be able to withstand all of that? Because that's the truth.
There's, like, this over-identification with something, with an identity that we think will keep us safe.
Yeah.
But in fact, it doesn't keep us safe. It's not keeping anyone safe, particularly Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color. There's an unconscious bias and in an unconscious level, in a cognitive dissonance to not being able to see like what I'm doing and how that might be violent. And the other thing I hear you saying is that there really is this intolerance for discomfort, but
Mm-hmm.
we also have to rearrange what comfort is and what discomfort is, because in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
pieces in our world, I'm talking about, the so-called United States of America, comfort isn't really comfortable. It's denial, it's delusion, it's separation, like so on and so forth. So I hear you like talking about all of this. And the other thing that as you were speaking that I just wanted to parse out, I wanted to get your take on it, because you write about this so much in the book, or you address it in the book. And I love it because I don't always hear this spoken about. And as a white woman, and I primarily work with white women, I have definitely been on the receiving end and I can experience it. And I'm sure I have been on the, giving it out end. And what I'm talking about is a spectrum of violence, because, white women will be like, well, I'm not throwing a vase at her head, or I'm not calling the cops, or I'm not, I'm not raising my voice. I'm not violent. And you really touch upon this covert spectrum of violence that you have seen in your intimate relationships, in your clients, and at the world of large, that like white women will tend to enact. And I was just wondering if you could just speak a little bit about that now, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's under the umbrella of emotional violence. And again, part of this is absolutely tied into and packed into everything that we just talked about, including like this inability to fulsomely express ourselves, most importantly, like our rage and anger. So it comes out not in like a fist fight outside of a bar, which is very like, cis hetero male or masculine, but it does come out a lot. And for those who are women identifying like femmes, if you think back to, I don't know if this will be true for everyone, but I imagine it's true for a lot of folks. But if you think back to high school, if you were a woman or femme identifying in high school, like what a fucking violent time. The things that were said, like the things that the behaviors that took place, and that continues past high school. But I just really note high school being like a time where people can be like, oh yeah, wait, like that was really fucked up. So when I'm talking about emotional violence, I'm talking about gaslighting, like denying someone's lived experience, like, oh, I didn't mean that, you're being sensitive. That kind of shit, that's fucking violent. Or silencing people is emotionally violent. Ghosting on people, like just shutting people out, shutting down and ignoring people is emotionally violent. Spiritual bypassing, which is so rampant in the wealth and hellness industry, just like this love and light supremacy shit of everything needs to be like rainbows and butterflies and we don't have hard conversations because that's low vibe, is fucking violent, because that's not the reality of the world. And also, again, you're denying and rejecting my lived experience when you say that. So all of these things are forms in which we, white silence, like just being mute in situations where there's injustice happening, which benefits you and is for your comfort, is violent. White solidarity, this happens a lot. Like, a person of color, Black, Indigenous person of color will say, be brave enough to speak truth to a situation, share a lived experience, call someone in or out, and there's more than white person involved, and they're speaking to maybe one white person, and another white person will be like, that's not what they meant, like speaking for them, like just making sure that you are shut down. And all of these things are violent. Like, I don't need to be, I say this in the book, like I've never been in a physical altercation. I've never had anyone like punch me or physically harm me. Well, my father, but that's a whole other story, which I also talk about in the book. But I have been abused throughout my whole life emotionally. And let me tell you, I don't want to say it's worse because I can't. I don't know. And every experience is different. But I will say I don't think it hurts less. And what's really particularly fucked up about it is it's very easy for you to believe that harm is of your own making or choosing, and that there's something fundamentally wrong with you as a person, which I really think is arguably the most violent thing in the world. If you punch me in the face, there's a lot that I could do with that, but like, you punched me in the face. That was you. There's no me being like, I really made you punch me. There can be. I won't get into the ins and outs, but we all get it. You punch me in the face, you punched me in the face. When you punch me with words and all of this manipulative, deviant behavior, I will punch myself and think that I caused it.
We got to talk a little bit more about this because I really wanted to talk to you about this after reading your book, because you have come out the other end of being in situations for decades of being gaslit, and what that does is that really takes a toll, and that ends up, at least in my life, it's taken a toll in terms of me gaslighting myself, like catching myself, gaslighting myself. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how you were able to break free from sort of the internal gaslighter, because like, as you said, that's really rough to be left with that after so many interactions with people saying, no, that's not true, or your experience isn't right, or I didn't mean that, or you're too sensitive, or you're too angry, or get over yourself. It was just a joke. Like, you share, experiences of being shunned, or of, being shut down, of being silenced, of, all of the different ways that this can transpire. So I was hoping you could share a little bit about the work you've done to heal from that.
Yeah, it's ongoing for sure in 2020.
Yeah,
for sure in this season, this time of being alive. But therapy, a lot of therapy, a lot of peeling back layers of really getting to the crux of what's mine and what's not mine, and what's really at the forefront of that healing work for me right now. It sounds simple, and it's not something that has like been off my radar, but again, it's like rest. It sounds simple, and then to embody it and live it is totally different. I am worthy of care, and my needs are valid, period. I am worthy of care, whether you're giving it to me or not. I am worthy of it, and my needs are valid. So if you're coming at me with shit that is trying to reject my needs or tell me I'm wrong, right? This is what I've heard time and time again throughout my life in every possible way, professionally, personally, partners, friends, whatever. It's that my needs are, there's something wrong with the needs that I have. I don't have a right to have those needs. Too much. Expectations are too high. You're too sensitive. You're too emotional. You're too everything. I am who I am. And I have the needs that I have. And that doesn't just mean like I'm great and everything I do is fucking wonderful and I don't have work to do. No, of course I do. But to disqualify someone's needs, again, like I don't know anything more violent, because our needs are what our needs are. There's a lot unpacked around like what's happening for you in those moments when you feel like this palpable need arise. And there's many ways that we can express our needs, some of which can be violent for sure. But your need is your need. Period. So no one has a right to tell you that you don't have a right to those needs. The other piece that's really palpable for me right now is the ways in which, again, people who have been made most marginalized don't get requisite care. We are uncared for. So specifically, being a queer Black woman, the ways in which the world does not give me care, that I don't get my needs met in the way that other people will, then creates this vicious cycle because I don't feel like I get my needs met. It makes me need to feel like I need to be more ambitious or more actively seeking out the needs, right? And then the world's constantly, personally and collectively, individually, collectively, constantly telling me that my needs are invalid, that I don't have a right to have the needs that I have. And then they like send you into crisis because you aren't getting your needs met. And then because you get less care, you are just left alone in crisis.
I mean, and I also hear you saying like sometimes a need is just simply wanting to be treated as a human being and like listened to and acknowledged. Like, so it's not, sometimes it could be champagne and caviar or whatever, but I feel like what I hear you saying too is needs and boundaries. Because sometimes a boundary is a need. It's like, hey, actually, I'm not continuing this conversation. You're calling me horrible names or whatever. And then the person or whatever is like, blah, blah, blah. Or so it comes in all of these different waves and forms. So I'm glad that you've been able to do that work. And because I think boundary work is probably energetic boundary work, emotional boundary work, all of the advocacy is probably a big part of that as well.
Yeah, and thank you for parsing that out, because that's a huge part of it. It's me being able to reclaim my energetic sovereignty and have that understanding of like my needs are what my needs are. And when I say needs, do I mean like my emotional needs? Like there's a lot of needs I have, but what's underneath those needs? Um, and we all have a lot of the same needs, but our strategies for getting them are different. And also, when you have been someone who's been subject to oppression, as have all of your ancestors, like there's a lot of other shit that we have to unpack around what our needs are and why they show up the way that they show up. And then all of that, of course, is compounded by living in a world that like doesn't give you what you need on purpose. So boundary work has been absolutely vital and allowed me. It's interesting because when we talk about boundary work, I feel like for people imagine kind of like walls,
Yeah.
Or isolation. And for me, it's like actually has been such a filling, nourishing experience because I get to give myself what I need. When I claim what my needs are, I am taking care of myself. And when I don't, I'm abandoning myself. And that's the hardest part also about being subject to the emotional violence, is that when you are in systems and situations where you can't identify it or you can't recognize it for yourself, or it's just unsafe, because that's also a reality for me. It's just unsafe. You're constantly abandoning and betraying yourself, and nothing feels worse. Nothing feels worse. So the boundaries that are imperative for this work really allow me to stand in my truth and be who I am and take care of myself and give myself what I need. And then other people can can support in that or not. And I don't have to be like completely blown over by it.
Yes. And that requires vulnerability too. And I think it requires honesty, it requires vulnerability, and it also requires compassion. Okay, I just have a couple more
Yes.
questions. Wow, yeah, this is so great. I'm already like, know that I want to listen to this again. Like normally I don't always, but I'm like, I need a lot of this
Always
wisdom.
people are
My
talking to you.
need is that I need to hear more of your wisdom. So what I wanted to know, again, no wrong answers. What have been some of the lessons you are learning in this pandemic year? Global unrest, uprising, lot of growth for you personally in your business. Also writing a book that I know while reading it was not easy to write on multiple levels because you are so vulnerable. It is incredibly well researched. There's obviously years of work that went into this book. It is a real book where I feel like you're modeling all of the work you've done. Like you're like, I'm
Thank you.
here, I'm showing up as myself, and also I want to help you show up as yourself so we can fight these systems of abuse, violence, and oppression. What are your reflections? This is airing right around when your book is going to be coming out. I know that there will still be a pandemic. We still are processing. We're still in process. I'm just wondering if you could just share some of your thoughts around that.
I mean, so much of what we've been talking about have been my biggest gleanings so far. And they come in shades, I want to say. It's like when I say some of these things, I kind of feel like, yeah, of course you're worthy of care and your needs, whatever. And I've been doing that work for decades. But again, it's like it comes in shades, and sometimes it really takes external situations to support you. Crisis also to support you really get clear and firm. Like we really get clear and firm on our boundaries when people have just shit all over them for so long, and we're like, no, I'm done now with this. I would say one of my just major takeaways from this season is how little care Black women and femmes receive, and how absolutely unacceptable that is, and just how grateful I am to have such phenomenal Black women and femmes in my life who have gotten me through this period. Like I wholeheartedly don't think I'd still be here if not for other Black women and femmes, because they can specifically have an understanding of all the intricacies. We're all very different, of course. We're not a monolith, but like the intricacies of having to navigate this world and like figure out your own shit as a human, an individual human, and all of the obstacles that we face in society, and the ways that those compound and cause so much harm. And I just also feel like we give each other care. We give each other care in a way that like no one else does. Again, often unintentionally, but I talk about this in my book a lot. Like, fuck your intention, I don't care. It's what's the impact. So that has been a huge blessing because, like I said, I grew up in a predominantly white and wealthy town, and so I didn't even know, and so there's also pros and cons to that, because now that I have this community of phenomenal Black women and femmes in my life, and queer and trans folks, I also see you get to see the patterns in a way you don't when when it's just you. So there is also some more, it's like that onion piece again. It's like, if I felt like these things were just me, then at least, and you know, I've learned this from childhood trauma, at least I feel like I can control something about it, because it's my personality, and I can do my healing work, or I can change or whatever. I can't change systems of oppression. I'm obviously trying my fucking hardest, but like, I can't actually do that. That requires so much, and all of us, and no, I don't think I'm going to see it in my lifetime. But when I'm witnessing, as we close out a motherfucker of a year, of a season, and I'm talking to all these other folks made most marginalized, and we're all seriously struggling. Like, mental health is at an all-time low in communities made most marginalized. That really is incredibly challenging to sit with, because it's like, right, so a lot of this is me and my own healing work that I need to do, but I'm constantly coming up against systems of oppression that are causing harm and placing us into crisis. And that's real. So that has been a lot to process. And again, it's like seeing that play out in the now time and space, and then hearing my ancestors who were with me as I wrote the whole book. Like, there's parts of the book I'm like, oh, interesting. Didn't know we wrote that. Okay. I feel like you feel similarly as well, your writing experience maybe, but I hear them whispering too around this, like, yeah, this is what we mean. This is what we've been up against for hundreds and hundreds of years. So the work can feel insurmountable. It can feel insurmountable, because how can we overcome so much oppression? How can we overcome all the compounded trauma? You know, in the course of writing this book, I learned that both of my parents were subject to sexual abuse from family members. It's suspected that my mother was sexually abused by her mother, my grandmother, who's no longer, neither of them are with us any longer. How do you hold that? And then immediately to be like, I obviously was very angry. And then also immediately like, what did my grandparents go through to be in a place where you will cause that kind of harm? Devastatingly heartbreaking. How do you process that? How do you move through that, knowing that it's easy to demonize an individual, but this isn't just an individual act. These things have repercussions down ancestral lines, down familial lines, and is a result of shit that's happened down ancestral and familial lines. And so again, I'm going to say this till the cows come home. I talk about this in my book, but this is true not just for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This is also true for white people. This is true for everyone, and we all have work that we need to do in having an acknowledgement of our ancestry and what really fucking happened, and the amount of trauma that has occurred and gone unspoken and lives in our bodies. And I truly believe that we chose to be here at this time. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know why I chose to be here at this time, but I truly believe that we chose to be here at this time. And this is a really pivotal time to be alive. And one of the gifts is that I think we truly have an opportunity to be able to heal this shit across time and space.
I agree with you. And so I wanted to just close by asking you, like, what is it the gifts of doing the healing work that keeps you going? Is it your own spiritual practice? I'm just, I think a lot of people would love to hear about what sort of keeps you moving through the heartbreak, moving through dealing with thousands of disconnected white women. Well, it's a lot. That's a lot.
Oh, it is. It really is.
And dealing with your own ancestral trauma, your own trauma, like your own lifetime trauma, and the trauma of the world. I would love to hear what has kept you holding the vision, because you've held the vision for years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. If I didn't hold the vision, I couldn't live. I couldn't stay here. Like, what the fuck would I be here for? You know what I mean? So I guess that's like full circle to what I said when we sort of kicked off, is like, if I didn't feel like I had purpose, and I also just wanted to clarify, to me, having purpose doesn't mean that you are doing anything. Like, purpose is having an understanding of your unique worthiness as a being. And how important that is, and how all of us deserve that. And that's what, to me, racial justice is. It is creating liberation so that we can all be who we are and be accepted and fulfilled, right? Like, and so I strive for that because I was so deprived of it. I have been so deprived of it in my life. And yeah, I get emotional about this, but like I do this work so other people don't have to feel as isolated, as misunderstood, as ostracized, and as harmed as I have, because it's not okay. Yeah.
We're tearing up. It's the perfect time to close such a soulful, heart-led, honest, truthful, intelligent, brilliant conversation. Rachel Ricketts. The book is Do Better. You can pick it up everywhere. You can pick it up wherever you are listening. We have people in Australia. We have people in the UK. We have people everywhere listening to this. You can pick it up wherever you are. Rachel, where can folks find you?
Thank you. Yeah, you can find me on my website, www.rachelricketts.com, and you can check out the book, and you can also check out my online webinars. And I have free resources, including grief resources, which are very helpful during these times, racial justice resources, a Buy Black and Indigenous page, so lots and lots of goodness there. And on Instagram, at I am Rachel Ricketts, tons of lessons, learnings, offerings that my team and I are always sharing in that space. And if you head to the website, you can also sign up for the newsletter, which comes out twice a month with tons of soul care offerings, racial justice prompts, and a monthly reparations roundup to support you in doing the work of redistributing wealth and supporting those made most marginalized.
Okay, my babes, I am wishing you a blessed week. Happy integrating. Happy new mooning. Happy doing better. Happy balancing. Happy all of the things. Until next week. You are listening to Moonbeaming, a podcast that is presented by modern women. I'm your host, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. The editor is Caitlin George Parker. Music is by Will Owen and myself. All right, bye. Witches